I found myself in a dilemma that I never thought I'd have to face. The problem is a bit complicated, but I'll try to explain it clearly. It's not a typical family drama, but it's been building up for years. Now, it has reached a point where I feel like I've been taken advantage of, used for every penny I've earned, and I'm left wondering if it's time to walk away for good. I'm 38 years old, married with 2 kids, and I've been living in Ohio for the last 6 years. Before this, I was in Houston, where I grew up. Life was never perfect, but I managed. My parents divorced when I was 10, and it was messy. My dad accused my mom of infidelity, but till today, it's unclear whether it was just an accusation or if there was some truth to it. Either way, he moved out, leaving us behind with no explanation, and I was left to deal with the fallout. My sister was only 5 when they split up, so she doesn't remember much. For me, though, the wounds were deeper. Dad paid for my education after the divorce, but never for my sister's. I have no idea why Mom never contested that. It was as if she accepted it without question. Over the years, people started to believe Dad's accusations about my sister not being his biological child, and though I never fully believed it, it was hard to ignore. Dad, however, always treated me like his only child, and after years of not being involved in our lives, he started to reach out to me more. I guess I grew closer to him, and that created a bigger divide between me and Mom. Dad passed away last year, and in his will, he left me everything. He had remarried after his divorce from my mom, but he never had children with his second wife. He always told me I was his one and only daughter, and that made things tense between me and Mom, even more so when I inherited his $400,000 trust fund. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was also about the fact that Dad had always been the one to provide for me. He paid for my private school and college, and when I got my degree, I was in a better position than my sister, who had to settle for less. Fast forward to today. My mom and sister are still in Houston, and I'm here in Ohio. They both struggle financially. Mom works as a cashier at a local supermarket, and my sister is in sales at a boutique. They barely make ends meet, and while I've always helped out whenever I could, it's gotten to the point where I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. It all started innocently enough. A few months ago, Mom called me and said the house we grew up in was falling apart. The walls were cracking, the roof leaked when it rained, and the electrical wiring was outdated. She said she couldn't afford to fix it, and the thought of living in a crumbling house was becoming unbearable. I knew this was coming. She'd hinted at needing money for repairs for years. But this time it was different. She was more direct. She told me she had gone to the bank to ask for a loan, but that the interest rates were too high. That was when I realized what she was asking for. She wanted me to pay for the repairs. She didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. The problem was, I wasn't sure if I could afford to help her with this. I'd just bought my own house, and I had my family to think about. I hesitated, but eventually agreed to help. I told her I could lend her $50,000 in installments, but she had to give me access to the bank account where the money would be sent, so I could keep track of it. I knew that she couldn't be trusted to manage the money on her own, especially after everything that had happened. I transferred $10,000 into my inactive Houston account and gave her access. I tried to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, but there was something about it that didn't feel right. I knew that she had always been financially dependent on me, but it was starting to feel like I was enabling her to avoid responsibility for her own life. Then, a few weeks later, I found out that my sister was getting married. I didn't find out from my family, no. I learned about it through one of my old school friends. She happened to be friends with the wedding planner my sister was working with. It wasn't a small wedding either. It was going to cost $50,000, and it was being held at one of the most expensive venues in Houston. My friend had told me all about it, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister was getting married, and I hadn't even been invited. I wasn't even on the guest list. It wasn't just the fact that I wasn't invited that hurt, it was the money. Where was she getting this kind of money from? This was the same sister who had never had much of anything and had always struggled financially. She had worked hard, yes, but I never imagined she could afford something this extravagant. That's when I checked the bank account where I had been sending money for the supposed home renovations. It was empty. I called my mom, and that's when everything started to fall apart. I asked her if the renovation work had started, and she told me yes, but when I asked for details about the progress, she became evasive. I started to suspect that something wasn't right. I had been suspicious of her motives for a while, but this confirmed my fears. I knew that she was using my money, not for repairs, but for my sister's wedding. I called my aunt, my father's sister, who lived nearby, and asked her if she knew anything about the wedding. She confirmed it, but she too hadn't been invited. It became clear that my mom and sister had been living a lie. They had been pretending to be poor while asking me for money for things that weren't even real. It disgusted me. I tried to confront my mom, but she denied everything. She told me that the money I had sent for the renovation was actually going toward the wedding, and she admitted that they had used the knee transplant money I had given her for something else entirely. It was a slap in the face. At that point, I made a decision. I stopped responding to their calls and messages. I didn't want anything to do with them. They had crossed a line, and I was done. But it wasn't easy. My mom and sister continued to contact me, apologizing and begging for more money. They were desperate, but I couldn't bring myself to help them anymore. I didn't want to punish them, but at the same time, I couldn't allow them to keep using me. I had to put an end to it, even if it meant losing them for good. My sister's wedding was coming up, and I knew they were struggling to make ends meet without my help. It was hard, but I had to stick to my decision. After I made the decision to ghost my family, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. It was empowering to reclaim my independence, yet the thought of abandoning my sister, especially on what should be a joyful occasion, weighed heavily on me. I had spent years feeling responsible for my family's well-being, but now I was realizing that their dependency on me was not my burden to carry. As days turned into weeks, the wedding approached, and the calls from my mom and sister continued. They flooded my voicemail with messages that ranged from frantic pleas for money to tearful confessions of how much they missed me. But no matter how heart-wrenching their words were, I remained firm in my decision. I had to protect myself from their manipulation. I confided in my husband, Mark, about everything that had transpired. He listened patiently, offering his support. "You've done so much for them over the years," he said, trying to comfort me. "It's okay to take a step back. You have your own family to think about now." But the guilt was still there, gnawing at me. I wondered if I was being too harsh. What if my sister really did need my help? Would I be able to live with myself if I left her to suffer? These thoughts haunted me late at night when I lay awake, my mind racing with doubts and what-ifs. As the wedding day drew nearer, I received a message from my friend who is still in contact with my sister's wedding planner. She told me that the wedding preparations were falling apart. My sister had promised to pay for various services, but was struggling to keep up with the payments. The wedding planner had informed her that without the full payment, they would have to downgrade to a less extravagant venue and cut back on the catering options. Hearing this stirred something within me. Part of me wanted to step in and help my sister salvage her wedding, but the other part reminded me of how she had treated me throughout our lives. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. How could she expect me to help her after everything that had happened? I wanted to believe that I was better than the situation I was in, that I could rise above the family drama and be a good person without sacrificing my well-being. On the day of the wedding, I decided to spend time with my children at a local park. I felt a bittersweet pang of regret as I thought about my sister donning a beautiful wedding dress while I was missing out on all of it. But I also reminded myself that this was a consequence of her choices and manipulations. Mark and I sat on a park bench, watching our kids play. I saw a couple nearby, their laughter echoing through the air, and for a moment, I felt envious of their carefree joy. "Do you think I did the right thing?" I asked Mark, biting my lip in uncertainty. He nodded. "You're not responsible for their happiness. You've given them more than enough. If they chose to betray your trust, that's on them, not you." I appreciated his unwavering support, but doubt still clouded my mind. After an hour, I felt the urge to check my phone for messages. My heart raced as I saw missed calls and texts from my sister and mom. They were begging me to come, pleading with me not to miss such an important day. I felt the familiar tug of guilt, but quickly reminded myself of the lies they had told. Just as I was about to put my phone away, I received a call from my aunt. "You need to come to the wedding," she urged. "It's chaotic over here. Your sister is in tears, and your mom is beside herself. They need you." My heart sank. I had to admit I felt a pang of sympathy, but I didn't want to be pulled back into their web of manipulation. "I can't," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "I can't be a part of this." "Your family and family is supposed to be there for each other," she insisted. "This is your sister's big day. It's not about the money. It's about love and support." Her words struck a chord, and I found myself wavering. Maybe I should go. But then, images of my sister's lavish wedding plans danced in my mind. How they had deceived me, using my hard-earned money to fund a day that should have been built on genuine love, not material excess. "I have to go," I said finally, making up my mind, but only to see how everything turns out. I can't just stand by while they put on this show. When we arrived at the venue, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. The venue was extravagant, adorned with flowers and twinkling lights. The laughter and chatter filled the air, but it felt hollow to me. I spotted my sister in her stunning gown, surrounded by a group of friends, laughing as if everything was perfect. As I walked closer, I noticed how they had decorated the space. The elegance of it all struck me. It made me sick to my stomach. How could they flaunt this wealth and happiness when they had been so dishonest with me? I approached my sister, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Nice place," I commented, crossing my arms over my chest. She turned, surprise flickering across her face. "You came," she exclaimed, her tone overly cheerful. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, forcing a smile. I had to keep my emotions in check. I had no intention of ruining her day, but I wouldn't let her believe that I was here to support her after everything that had happened. "Mom was worried you wouldn't come," she said, her tone suddenly shifting. "She said you were angry with us." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I'm just here to see how this all goes down." Before she could reply, Mom appeared, her eyes widening as she saw me. "Oh, thank goodness you're here. Your sister has been so nervous." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, not buying her act for a second. "Yes. We're just so happy to have you here," she said, wrapping her arms around me in a hug. I stood rigid, feeling her desperation seep through the embrace. I pulled away, maintaining a safe distance. "Let's get this over with, shall we?" Throughout the ceremony, I remained detached. My heart ached for the bond one never had with my sister, a bond one longed for, but never really experienced. All I could think about was the facade they had built, a perfect wedding that masked their manipulation. As the reception began, I made my way to the bar, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I was about to witness my sister's big day, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that hung heavily in the air. I turned to leave the bar, but as I did, I overheard a conversation between my sister and her friends. They were laughing and making snide comments about how my absence would reflect poorly on me, how I was the one who had been left out. It cut deep, the realization that I was still the outsider in my own family. Suddenly, I spotted my friend from earlier, the wedding planner, and I couldn't help but approach her. "How's everything going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Honestly," she said, lowering her voice, "it's been a nightmare. Your sister is demanding, and the budget is all over the place. I just hope we can pull it off without a hitch." I nodded, feeling a mix of sympathy and resentment. She didn't say anything about how she was funding this, did she? "No," my friend said, her eyes narrowing. "I thought it was odd, though. You'd think with the way she's acting, she would have saved up. But there's something off about it." At that moment, I knew I couldn't let this go on. My sister's grand day was built on lies, and it was time to confront her. I excused myself from my friend and made my way back to my sister, who was now surrounded by guests, reveling in the attention. I cleared my throat, capturing her attention. "Can we talk?" "Sure. I'll be right back, everyone," she said, feigning a bright smile as she followed me to a quieter corner. Once we were out of earshot, I confronted her. "I know you've been using my money for this wedding. I thought you were renovating the house, not planning a lavish wedding." Her expression turned defensive. "What are you talking about? You have no idea what I've been through." "I do know," I replied, my voice steady. "I've given you money under false pretenses. I trusted you." "Mom said you were angry and didn't want to help," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You can't just cut us off because you inherited money. This is family. Family doesn't lie to each other for money." I shot back, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You've made me feel guilty for years, and now you expect me to just support your wedding? I'm done with this." Her face hardened, and I could see the facade start to crack. "You don't know what it's like to struggle. You've always had everything handed to you. You think I haven't struggled? You think this is easy for me? I've worked hard for everything I have," I said, my voice rising. "You think you're better than me just because you went to a better school and inherited money?" she retorted, her tone dripping with venom. "I never said I was better, but I'm not going to be your bank anymore," I declared, cutting her off. "I've been used enough. This wedding is on you." With that, I walked away, my heart racing. I didn't want to look back, didn't want to see her face, as I left her to revel in the consequences of her actions. I felt liberated, but also profoundly sad. The reception carried on, and I found myself standing at the edge, watching my sister as she laughed and danced with her friends. I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. We were supposed to be sisters, sharing joy and life together. But instead, we were two strangers on opposite sides of a divide that felt impossible to bridge. Later that night, I received another call from my mom, this time filled with desperation. "You need to come home, please. Dove is a wreck, and we can't do this without you. You created this mess," I replied coldly. "Don't expect me to fix it." "But she's my daughter," Mom pleaded, her voice shaking. "And I'm your daughter too, but you've made it clear where your loyalties lie," I snapped before hanging up. The next morning, I found myself sitting on my porch, watching the sun rise with a cup of coffee in hand. My husband joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I've lost my family, and I don't even know if it was worth it." "You did what you had to do. They've been taking advantage of you for years," he reminded me. "It's time to put yourself first." I nodded, taking a deep breath as I watched the sun rise higher in the sky. I realized that it was time to let go of the guilt. My sister and mother had made their choices, and while it hurt to walk away, I had to prioritize my own family and happiness. In the days that followed, I received more messages from my sister and mom, each more desperate than the last. I remained firm, ignoring their pleas and focusing on my own life. It felt empowering to reclaim my independence, to finally say no without feeling the weight of guilt. Eventually, I learned from my aunt that my sister's wedding had ended in disaster. The guests were disappointed, and my sister's reputation took a hit. The lavish event that had been built on lies crumbled before her eyes, and I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I had chosen my path, and as painful as it was, I knew I was stronger for it. Time went on, and I focused on my family, my children, and building a life filled with love and authenticity. The burden of my mother and sister's expectations lifted, and I found a new sense of peace. My husband supported me through it all, and together, we built a family that thrived on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. Though I may never have the relationship I once hoped for with my mother and sister, I learned that sometimes letting go is the most powerful choice of all.